So, hi everyone, my name is Maddi, and I am here to tell you why you should consider improving your generic world designs by drawing from real life. So this is going to be kind of drawing from some of the same themes as like Victoria and John's talks, because obviously we're talking about genre and how you should maybe consider looking at real resources for things other than guns. So there's quite a bit to unpack here, and I'll be addressing that as soon as I've addressed two other important questions. Firstly, and most importantly, if anyone is wondering, yes, I did use a Flowrider lyric for the title of my talk. I named it at 2 AM, so sorry. Secondly, who am I? Well, again, I'm Maddi. Hi. I'm a solo visual novel developer, and I recently graduated with my master's degree. Oh, sorry, well, I recently completed my master's degree. Technically, they haven't given me the piece of paper for it yet. My master's degree was, again, on culture in video game worlds and how games can draw more from real life to try and enrich the worlds that are depicted in them. And the visual novel that I'm working on at the moment, Inverness Nights, is set in 1750 Scotland, a very particular setting. So I'm interested in how we integrate elements from real life into generic settings, and through those two bits of work, I've learned a bit about doing so in the last couple of years. So firstly, when I call something generic, what do I mean? Generic doesn't just refer to a work being samey or repetitive. It also means belonging to a genre. So when I talk about games belonging to a genre, I mean it in one of two ways, either fictive or mechanical. So mechanical genre is the type of gameplay featured, and what we normally think of when we're describing games. So we've got a first-person shooter, a role-playing game, and a point-and-click adventure. When this talk discusses genre, though, we're talking about fictive genre. So this is the genre of traditional fiction a game belongs to. So in this framework, Metroid is sci-fi, Metal Gear is a war game, and Life is Strange is a teen drama. So this defines the setting and the aesthetics of a game and the design of the game's world. So to unpack how genre defines world design, we'll use my favorite film-inspired series, Castlevania. So in the classic Vania installments of the series, which are Castlevania to Castlevania Rondo of Blood, you've got inspiration from Universal and Hammer horror monster movies, so Gothic movies, if you will. And it combines their stark chiaroscuro tones and these imposing castles with the action platform and mechanical genre. Because there was no Gothic action platformers at the time Castlevania was originally released, this combination was unique, and the combination of those fictive and mechanical genres stood on its own. As the series continued, Gothic action platformer became less unique due to the number of Castlevania titles, as well as similar titles like Shakan the Forever Man. So the mechanical genre then changed to 2D exploratory platformer, or what we normally call Metroidvania. This makes the Gothic worlds exciting again by adding new ways to interact with them, but it doesn't change the design. Eventually, we reach titles in the series like Dawn of Sorrow. So in Dawn of Sorrow, there isn't really anything new that's done with the castle. And the other thing is they don't really have any ways to spice up the way you're interacting with the castle anymore either. So that means that it kind of runs out of new things to do, and players who have gone through a lot of the series beforehand are bored. It's just a mash of familiar genres, and Mothman is there. I love Mothman, but he's not enough to make this series new again. So after that, how can we fix things? Well, a couple more games come out that use that original combination of Gothic and action platformer, and then Castlevania Lords of Shadow comes along. So whatever people want to say about the rest of the game, the environments and the world that it's set in is wonderful and new again. So it's developed by this Spanish studio called Mercury Steam, and they used local churches, castles, and ruins to inspire their setting. As a result, the iteration of the world is unique, because it's got this warm, faded grandeur of Spanish ruins that isn't present in the rest of the series and isn't present in a lot of classical Gothic work. I mean, you can see it in things like Guillermo del Toro, but he's, you know, working from his own pool of specifically Mexican design and that sort of thing. So by introducing a real-life element to the world, Mercury Steam created a space that hadn't been explored in these games before, reinvigorating the Castlevania series and producing a setting that says more about the characters inside it than the original generic Gothic castle did. This is a sensible choice, and I can't remember where I was going with that. Let's continue. So, having focused on the way that real-life elements make a game world unique, let's move on to the way they make a world relatable. So, most worlds in games have characters in them, and most of these characters are meant to invoke empathy somehow. So, the more unrealistic a world is, the harder it is to empathize with the characters in it. We don't feel pain when Mario falls off of a platform, because he's in a world with floating bricks, giant pipes. We don't necessarily understand the physics there, and we don't know what's going to happen to Mario when he hits the bottom. By contrast, when we see the Inside Boy fall over something, it can actually cause us to feel sort of physical pain as players, because it's got realistic physics and a realistic setting, and we know what happens when children fall off things. So when we can see ourselves in a location, we can react more viscerally than when we see somewhere unfamiliar or somewhere more abstract. We can deduce the function, who built it, who lives in it. The last point in particular of who lives in it is hugely useful in games where we're expected to learn about characters through their homes or the environments that they work in. So that can be things like walking simulators or point-and-click adventures. It can also be useful in other genres, though, where character identity is tangential or normally defined by dialogue, just as another way of reinforcing them. So let's talk about Fallout, Fallout New Vegas specifically. So while New Vegas features some environmental storytelling like the Bethesda games in the series, the recycling of assets from Fallout 3 means a lot of the locations are cobbled together from generic items. You've got, you know, crashed cars, destroyed homes, and bottles of Nuka-Cola everywhere. It needs to communicate somehow, though, that it's in Las Vegas instead of Washington, D.C., and it needs to communicate which aspects of Las Vegas are being satirized in each area of the game. So, let's flip out of there for a moment and talk about something from real life. Howard Hughes. Now, if you're not familiar, Howard Hughes was an eccentric business magnate who moved to Las Vegas later in life. He locked himself in the penthouse of the Desert Inn for 4 years while buying out the Strip. During his stay, he revitalized many casinos with his fortune, while also guaranteeing their demise by leaning into this old-fashioned class that he loved rather than the newer, broader appeal of places like Caesar's Palace. So he was basically trying to make everyone wear tuxedos while they were all running around wearing togas, getting drunk, that sort of thing. So by leaning into this sort of old-school style rather than the newer sort of identity that Las Vegas was starting to transition into, he proved that he was the ideal symbol of this old, self-indulgent business culture there. He embodies its lack of foresight and also its disconnect from the average citizen. So you have to get Howard Hughes into Fallout. He's perfect. He's got themes dripping from him like he's a theme steak. So enters the character of Mr. House. So Mr. House, like Howard Hughes, owns the Strip and watches it from the penthouse of a fictional building. On a micro level, they managed to tie Howard Hughes into Mr. House with curtains. So, curtains. Most people have them. What's noticeable here? Well, Howard Hughes never opened his curtains during his entire stay at the Desert Inn, preferring not to look at the Strip. This was indicative of both his poor health and his self-absorbed nature. He didn't need to look at the Strip because no one in Las Vegas mattered except for him. New Vegas takes this aspect of his life and translates it into a sci-fi counterpart, this series of monitors that gets placed over Mr. House's window. This retains the psychological, cultural, and human implications of Hughes's curtains while making them generically appropriate. So integrating details from real life is an effective way to develop a world because life is inherently lived in. To elaborate on that a bit, when you work from a genre, the foundations of that genre have been formed by that genre's repetition in reality. If you hear Prince loves princess, Prince rescues princess from dragon, Prince and princess marry enough times in your life, you begin to accept fairy tale as a genre. When you decide to alter that format, your alteration must make clear sense, so that the break from the accepted genre is justified in turn. This encourages simple cause and effect inclusions and tropes like Chekhov's gun, where any unique element has plenty of internal explanation. So, for instance, people can't normally lift boulders, but Hercules picks up lots of heavy things in the opening of Hercules. So when he has to lift a boulder later on, we're like, yeah, Hercules can do that. That's normal for him. So if you want to break from genre without having to explain the break in clear, emphasized terms, real-world elements are self-justifying because life has proved they can occur. Video games have less room for written or spoken explanation than other mediums. I think someone checked and it averages at like 8 words per minute in most of those sort of 80-hour RPGs. So even in text-heavy genres like that, it's much lighter than a movie or a comic. And anything that explains itself in games is a useful tool for breaking from genericism. So, for instance, if I said to someone, yeah, women in my game, they wear 6 layers of skirt at once, even when they're doing their work, you'd be like, that's really impractical. But if I say, it's 1750, everyone's wearing petticoats, you're like, damn, that's a historical fact, petticoats are real, you can do that. So, that said, not every game needs to take inspiration from reality. Beating up Howard Hughes' corpse and stealing his curtains might not improve your hot new Legend of Zelda adventure. It's just a valuable question to ask while designing. Should this be relatable? Does it replicate an existing world in the genre without any meaningful differences? So, outside of obvious exceptions like the aforementioned Mario-style cartoon settings, a nice example of a game which avoids incorporation of real-world elements is Nier. So Nier is themed around fairy tales and takes place in an intentionally anonymous setting. Any specificity in the world would contradict its attempt at simple, universal fairy tale storytelling. It should also be noted that while I've leaned on architectural and historical inspirations, you can enrich your world with any factual component. So Final Fantasy VII combined fantasy with environmentalism, and Dead Rising combines zombie apocalyptica with the experience of being in a mall. On the indie side of things, Kentucky Route Zero combines Southern Gothic with the politics of debt, and Jalopy combines road tripping with car maintenance. Any field can give you an angle on an existing genre if you think through the combination. I'd like to conclude with a reference to the video that inspired this talk. So my favourite games website, Cool Ghosts, posted a video in January where the site owners Quinton Smith and Matt Lees played Hitman 2016. As they play, Quinns describes Hitman's world as feeling like a game made by people with hobbies that speaks of the real world in a way that is weirdly rare. So whenever I've played anything since, I've asked myself that question. Does this game feel like it was made by people with hobbies? Whether it's because of 80 Days' detailed indigenous cultures or Deadly Premonition's touristic Americana, I'm happy every time I can say yes. Because when you make a game world that speaks about your reality, you make a game world that speaks about you. Please, tell me how you live in your genre.